Worst case scenario is maybe you ran into that tree and now you're in hospital. Hey guys, it's Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. Today we're going to be talking about 5 things that you should not do with your bike. I've been working in bike shops for over a decade now. I've worked in sales and mechanics, and I've seen people do so many different things with their bikes. So I want to talk about the 5 most common mistakes that I've seen people make that I don't want to see you doing the same thing. Number 1, the most common thing that I've seen people do is when they bring their bike in for the service, it might be perhaps covered in mud or incredibly dirty. That means that I have to spend the first half of the service simply just cleaning the bike. Along with this being a courtesy thing, it also means that if you don't care for your bike bringing it into the service, chances are you probably don't care for it too much between services either. Keeping your bike well maintained between services, keeping it clean, that can help prolong the life of the bike. If you bring it in incredibly dirty, it might even mean that the service that you're doing might be a little bit more expensive than what it needed to be, because you may need to replace some extra parts that you weren't expecting. This doesn't mean that you have to wax and polish the frame. Even just perhaps a little frame wipe down might make the mechanic's job a little bit easier. Hopefully, during the service, they'll go through and give the bike a really deep clean anyway, but just bringing it in a little bit better than bad will always help them. Another mistake that I've seen people make, especially with electric bikes, is using a power washer to clean the bike. If you have a power washer and you're cleaning the bike, I recommend standing really far back so that you're not blasting the power straight into the bearings all throughout the bike. Ideally, probably not using a power washer, but if that's all that you've got, again, just stand a little bit further back so it's not incredible pressure washing all the grease out from the bearings, because we want the grease to be there. If you do find that you've pushed the pressure washer straight into the bearing and you've rinsed all the grease out, you might find that you end up having to replace the bearings or perhaps even just re-grease them. Either way, it's going to add more money onto the top of your service. This is why I recommend just simply wiping the bike down. I personally have a spray bottle and I'll usually spray on and then wipe off with a rag rather than using a pressure washer. This also means that when I'm rinsing and washing my bike at home, I can do it inside. I could perhaps even do it over carpet if it had to be, because I know it's not going to be super messy as well. When we're talking about power washing, it's incredibly important not to use it on electric bikes. We've got the motor down here, and there's lots of little holes throughout the motor that will allow hot air to escape from the motor. If water was to get in there, that's water getting on the electronics. That's probably about the worst thing that the motor could have. Rebuilding a motor can be an incredibly costly job. I have a mechanic friend who used to do them, and he said that he would often charge over $1,000 to rebuild a motor. That's before parts as well. Do not use your pressure washer on the motor. The third most common mistake that I've seen people make when maintaining their bike is they might be using WD-40 on the bike. This is not for push bikes. Do not use WD-40. I've met a lot of people throughout the years that use WD-40 to lubricate the chain on their bike. I have to politely try and find a way to tell them that they're doing it wrong. WD-40 is it's like a really heavy degreaser. So if anything, that might be able to perhaps clean the chain, but it's definitely not going to lubricate the chain. The issue that I have with WD-40 is that it's also an aerosol spray. So as you're trying to spray it onto the chain, it might be making a big mess and not just a direct line. That could mean that you might have some air particles that are finding their way onto the brake rotor. If you get this onto the brake rotor, your mechanic is going to give you an ugly phone call saying, "Hi, Mr. bike owner person, you need to get new pads and rotors." So the price of your service could increase dramatically if you need to get all those extra parts. I just recommend not using WD-40. We actually just made a video recently about how to clean your chain properly, and you'll see in that video, I say all the same things about WD-40. If you want to know more about it, we've got the link in the description to that little video as well. You might find that useful. You should absolutely be using the correct fluids when it comes to cleaning your chain. I tend to use this drivetrain cleaner and then different types of chain lubricant as well. One of the most common mistakes that I've seen people make with their bikes is leaving them stored away while they're still wet. Perhaps you went on a bike ride during the rain and now you've left the bike in the shed and then it's just sitting there wet. When we have water and oxygen, when we have these two sitting on top of metal, that can cause rust. It can cause oxidization. When we have rust on the way throughout the bike, whether it's perhaps on the spokes or the chain or maybe something to do with the brakes or the bolts throughout, it means that those parts are now a little bit more fatigued. They're not quite as strong as they need to be. This example that we happen to have here is probably on the more extreme side of things. Unfortunately, it looks like this one's been left maybe down the side of the house perhaps, and it's been in the rain. I might almost try and have a polite conversation with this person saying that it might be more cost effective for them just to consider buying a new bike And if they left this one here, I'd be happy to help out with recycling it or perhaps donating it to another place if it needs to be. The fifth most common mistake that I've seen people made is trying to bleed their brakes either without the proper tools, with the incorrect fluid, or perhaps even just without the knowledge of how to do it just yet. This could result in getting too much brake fluid onto the brake rotors or the brake pads, which means that they're going to be contaminated, very noisy, and they're not powerful anymore because there's almost like a soapy liquid between the brake pad and the brake rotor, so the brakes don't work very well at all. It could even be that you didn't push the fluid through the correct way. That means that there might not be enough fluid in the brake line, so perhaps you pull the brake lever and it comes all the way to the handlebar. Now the brake doesn't work either. It's worth noting as well that your brakes are the only thing that are going to stop you before you run into that tree. I think it's so important having nice, powerful brakes. If you were trying to bleed them and you made a mistake, that can all go out the window, unfortunately, and you might have to take it into the bike shop and pay them money to get them to repair it for you. Best case scenario, if you mess up the bleed, is that you might be able to take it into the local bike shop, pay them some money and get them to fix it. Worst case scenario is maybe you ran into that tree and now you're in hospital. A quick bonus one that I've got for you, something that I see all the time, is I often see people taking their road bikes off-road. They're sort of using their road bike as a gravel bike. Especially on the older road bikes, especially these rim brake ones here, the space that you have inside between the tire and the frame is often quite tight, so they don't handle off-road very well. With that being said though, I do know that a lot of the time in these road bike races, sometimes the course will go onto a little bit of an off-road section. I would say it's not ideal, but if that's where the race is going, that's where the race is going. But road bikes are designed to handle what happens on the road. Your chance of getting a flat tire or damage to either of your wheels or frame are so much higher when you're riding off-road. You might hit a really hard rock, which could cause the rim to perhaps crack. It could maybe flick up and cause a big chip in the paint or something like that. It's just not ideal to take a road bike off-road. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you haven't been doing too many of these things at home yourself. If you have been, it's probably best to stop. If you reckon there's anything that we've missed in this video, or you reckon somebody else might appreciate, let us know in the comments below. I'd love to hear. I think these are the six, I suppose, most common mistakes that I've seen people make with their bike. Other than that, I'm gonna say thanks for watching and we'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.